Welcome back to National Report. Could Vivek Ramaswamy be ending his political campaign? We'll tell you why there's some people questioning his next moves. The Republican presidential candidate reportedly stopping all TV spending less than a month before the Iowa caucuses and New Hampshire primary. NBC News reporting the campaign says they'll still be spending money on ads, just not on television.
A campaign official for Vivek Ramaswamy saying, quote, "We are focused on bringing out the voters we've identified. Best way to reach them is using addressable advertising, mail, text, live calls, and doors to communicate with our voters on Vivek's vision for America, making their plan to caucus and turning them out." John Ullyot is a former 2016 campaign senior advisor for the Trump campaign, and Jonathan Harris is a commentator and Democratic strategist joining us for this very discussion. Gentlemen, thank you. We appreciate the time. John, can I start with you, John Ullyot, on this? Ramaswamy calling it quits, at least on the TV ads. He's still in the race, by the way, so very clear. But what does this indicate when you're pulling back all TV ad spends in Iowa? Again, caucusing coming up in just a few weeks away. How important is Iowa?
Well, Shaun, the fact that he's pulling his ads away from the major markets and only going to be doing radio ads going forward, that really doesn't matter to the actual outcome in either Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, then later South Carolina and all the other states, is that he is not really a factor. I mean, Vivek is polling below 5% in most of those states. He has not had any surge. He really is campaigning to be maybe part of Trump's cabinet, possibly Secretary of Commerce, possibly Small Business Administration. So it looks like he's starting to ramp down what was already inevitable, that he couldn't get over 5 points. The real question is whether Chris Christie is going to do that. He's also polling behind 5 points behind in every other state except for New Hampshire. So look, if it's time for, Asa Hutchinson is still in the race. Amazing. So all of these third tier, second tier, third tier candidates, they should pull out, make it a New Year's resolution, go ahead and shut the doors on their campaigns.
And maybe, John, you were alluding to some of the polling that we've seen, including a Quinnipiac poll. It shows that Ramaswamy is coming in at about 4%. So even if you wanted to show up at the next debate, you'd think you'd need a lot more your poll numbers to increase, I should say. But Jonathan, is that fair to ask these candidates to drop out before even the first primary or caucus takes place?
You know, I mean, I think it's all about, what they can afford to spend. And if they think that there's any point in continuing on, I kind of agree. I think that most of these candidates are kind of jockeying for a position in the Trump administration should he get the nomination and God forbid for me win, because nothing else seems serious. I mean, these are when you're polling in single digits. I mean, it's hard to really make a case for why you should continue. I mean, when you're struggling to even get into the debate, continuing your campaign, unless what you're trying to do. I know there was some talk of former Governor Nikki Haley being of interest to Trump as far as a vice president. That's really the only thing that would make sense going forward. This isn't a serious candidacy for candidate for president or for the nomination.
Yeah, in terms of polling, too, in the next debates to qualify, you will now need 10% of 3 separate polls to even get in. So if that tells you anything, at least looking from the Quinnipiac poll. But many pollsters and many political analysts say there's still time for change. Jonathan Harris, I want to stay with you on this one here, and then I'll go to John Ullyot. So Jonathan Harris, breaking news here, Michigan Supreme Court rejecting this lawsuit to remove Trump from the ballot. It's not just Michigan. This has played out in several other states where it's been rejected or it has, again, moved through the court system. Colorado, again, removed Trump. Michigan going the opposite way, rejecting the removal of President Trump on the ballot. Jonathan Harris, what are your thoughts here? Democratic perspective on this. Do you think it should be up to the people? You're seeing mixed messaging here in terms of how the states are handling it.
Well, I think what you're having right now is you're having kind of both sides celebrating depending on what the outcomes are. I think obviously everybody knows this is really going to be something that is going to be decided by the Supreme Court. I do think that it's a bit strange to hear that our politics have descended to this, that this is even a question that we're having to ask, whether or not a major potential lead for a party should be allowed to be on the ballot because they engaged in an insurrection before. I mean, it's just something that's actually really just shocking to even think about. But the truth is, I'm shocked to hear conservatives saying that they think this should be decided by the voters. This is clearly within the purview of the courts. I mean, it is literally within the purview of the courts. And the idea behind the 14th Amendment is to protect the United States. It's to protect the United States from people who would try to overthrow the government. And I don't hear anything, even from conservatives who might, want to support former President Trump, even saying that there's an important provision there for that and that his conduct shouldn't even be nearing that. They're just immediately like, no, let the voters decide, bypass the law, let the voters decide. And this is the law and order candidate, I thought. I'm actually just really shocked that our politics have kind of descended there. It's kind of sad.
All right, you made your point and your perspective. John, what's your view on this one?
Well, look, this is just the latest case of lawfare being engaged in against President Trump because they can't beat him on the issues. The Democrats know how vulnerable Biden is. He's in the low 30s. Imagine that, low 30s in many polls. And he's behind Trump in every single one of the swing states. He's behind him by more than 10 points in Michigan, which is a must win. So the Democrats have decided that the best way to do, look, they have 4 indictments against him. They tried 2 impeachments. They tried the Russia hoax. Now it's onto this latest iteration of lawfare with going to the courts. And so it's been rejected by several states. And look, this is absurd on its face. And the only reason to do this is because they're behind in the polls, and everybody looks at this. It's a total sham. It's going to be thrown out by the Supreme Court, and actually it's helping President Trump in the polls, not only in the primary, but with independents, because they're looking at this and they're saying, to Jonathan's point, that it's absolutely absurd to be in this position, particularly when this candidate, President Trump, has never been charged nor convicted of insurrection, which is the very thing that Colorado has removed him from the ballot for.
Is it that they're trying these things, or is it that former President Trump engaged in these behaviors and then he's being charged with these things and having to face the music for them? I mean, you say that like, we made him do the things that he was impeached for, or the charges that he's facing. He did these things. And so he's facing the charges for them right now and having them litigated. But you make it sound like these are just attacks that we came up with out of nowhere. That's kind of ridiculous.
They absolutely are, because what they are is, for example, President Biden, he could be attacked for an insurrection for not enforcing our border, which is something that he is absolutely commanded to do as commander-in-chief. But to follow the law, we could go after Kamala Harris for inciting the BLM insurrection, where they stormed the White House. Was the border
secure under Trump?
Something that was the armed insurrection that had 40 people killed across the country in 2020. And the border is one. Then also, for example, just what's going on with Ukraine. I mean, President Biden was bragging that he withheld money, the very thing from Ukraine, in order to get the prosecutor from one of his a company that was giving his son $1 million a year. And he was bragging about that. And that's
was the border, just to go with one of your examples, was the border?
This is
was the border secure under Trump? Because I do remember migrants flooding over the border during Trump as well.
$5 billion away from building the wall, and now instead of securing our border, President Biden is now spending over $200 billion securing Ukraine's border. It's time for him to get serious.
So the border wasn't secure.
250,000 migrants coming over the border under Biden per month. And you had
I just think it's interesting that you're saying that Biden could be.
That were coming
we're venturing off into a
now we're
different
talking
territory
over
about
each
the
other.
border.
It's been interesting to listen, though.
I love it.
I appreciate the
love hearing
conversation.
both
We're not
views
getting
on
time
that.
to you, so I think we're letting it go. But we've
charged
got to wrap it. So right there. Gentlemen, thanks for coming on. John Ullyot, Jonathan Harris, always a pleasure.